Medicaid, and especially if it's sort of flipping it aside or for political gain, cannot be an option. I thank the chair and I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, tomorrow afternoon we're going to be voting on Senator Coburn's amendment dealing with ethanol. So I come to the Senate floor at this time to express my strong opposition to that amendment. Senator Coburn's amendment would raise the tax on domestic energy production. It would do this by repealing an incentive for the use of homegrown renewable fuel called ethanol. With conflicts in the Middle East and crude oil more priced at $100 a barrel or more, and domestic biofuels should be on the same side. Let me make that clear once again. We have Middle East problems. We have crude oil priced at over $100 a barrel. Oil interest and biofuel interest, if both are domestically produced, should be on the same side of the energy issue. Why would anyone prefer less domestic energy production? In other words, why would anyone prefer importing more oil over domestically produced energy, whether it's fossil fuel or whether it's renewable? We should all be on the same side of more domestically produced energy. The tremendous cost of America's dependence on foreign oil has never been more clear. I support drilling here and drilling now. I support renewable energy. I support conservation. I support nuclear energy. And the reason I support different forms of energy and why we have to support more energy, if you're going to have an expanding economy to create more jobs, you're obviously going to use more energy. And remember, I included conservation in my energy program. So the attacks on domestic energy is really quite a remarkable thing happening right now when gasoline's $4 a barrel and we're spending $385 million, or I should say $835 million a day importing oil. So whether it's oil or whether it's renewable energy, we shouldn't be fighting each other over any source of domestic energy. We should be fighting together against OPEC and these foreign dictators and oil sheiks, some of them that hate the United States, from holding our economy hostage. The author of the amendment has argued that the production of clean, homegrown ethanol is fiscally irresponsible. It's important to remember that the incentive exists to help producers of ethanol to compete with the oil industry. In other words, to have a level playing field for all forms of energy. And remember, the oil industry has been well supported by the Federal Treasury for more than a century. The senator from Oklahoma, the sponsor of the amendment, has touted with much fanfare a letter from oil companies that say they don't need or want the credit. It's my understanding that many of the oil refineries are no longer in the business of downstream ethanol blending and subsequently do not pay the excise tax on gasoline and do not benefit from the credit. Now, isn't it really easy to be advocating repeal of something when you don't benefit from it? It's even easier to advocate for its repeal when doing so would undercut your competition. It shouldn't surprise anyone that the oil refineries and big oil are advocating a position that would reduce the competitiveness now that they have from the renewable ethanol. Refineries enjoy a cozy monopoly on our nation's transportation fuel. They oppose the renewable fuel standard because it cuts into their monopoly. Alternatively, if the members of the National Petrochemical and Refiners Association say they don't want or don't need the credit, then it's pretty simple. Just don't take it. It's a tax credit which they must apply for in the first place, and they apply for it to the Internal Revenue Service. If they don't want it and they don't need it, they shouldn't file for that credit with the Internal Revenue Service. I'd be glad to work with the senator from Oklahoma in getting the members of the National Petroleum and Refiners Association to return the credit to the Federal Treasury. No one is forcing them to take the credit. Since they seem eager to return it, perhaps Senator Coburn and I can work together to get them to return it. If you like tight gasoline supplies, and if you like $4 gasoline, join the campaign led by Big Oil and the National Petrochemical and Refiners Association. But if you want less dependence upon foreign oil and more use of homegrown renewable fuels, support ethanol producers. The fact is, the portion of the industry that blends ethanol and sells it to the consumers supports maintaining this credit. I refer to an organization called the Society for Independent Gasoline Marketers of America, or they go by the acronym SIGMA, SIGMA. That organization recently wrote to Senate Majority Leader and Minority Leader opposing efforts to prematurely and abruptly eliminate the blender's credit, and I would quote from their letter, on behalf of our client, the Society of Independent Gasoline Marketers of America, I write to you to oppose efforts in Congress to prematurely and abruptly eliminate the VTEC. That's the ethanol blender's credit. Increasing the tax paid on ethanol blended gasoline makes no sense at a time when consumer fuel prices are already high and the need to maximize domestic energy sources is so very critical. Very true at the time when gasoline is $4 a barrel. Now, this organization, SIGMA, their members account for 37% of the petroleum retail market. SIGMA works to promote competition in the marketplace to help keep consumer fuel costs down. Now, this is contrary to the position of oil refiners who prefer no competition. I have further words from that letter. This incentive has been an extremely useful tool in helping the nation's fuel marketers and chain retailers deliver fuel to the market at a competitive price. Continuing to quote, by providing long-term price competitiveness for ethanol-blended fuels, VTEC also helps provide assurances to marketers and retailers that important infrastructure investments necessary to deliver these fuels will continue to provide returns and not result in wasted improvements. Further quote, simply put, SIGMA opposes recent moves to prematurely or abruptly end the subsidies without any consideration for future fuel or fuel delivery costs. To end this incentive immediately would no doubt result in an immediate spike in consumer fuel costs. And then the last paragraph, I quote, Sigma believes that a policy that provides an effective transition for the industry from the current tax structure is a better alternative to slash and cut budget strategy being promoted by some members of Congress. So there you hear from another segment of the industry. I would ask unanimous consent to put this entire record letter in the record at the conclusion of my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
The senator from Oklahoma also mentioned the total cost of the blender's credit as a reason for supporting repeal of VTAC. He claimed that the American people will have spent $32 billion on this credit over the past 30 years. Now, that may be the case. Again, I don't believe we should be debating ethanol incentives by themselves or in a vacuum. For comparison's sake, I'd like to inform my colleagues of the cost and duration of a few oil subsidies. The senator from Oklahoma has derided the 30-year-old ethanol blender's credit, arguing that the industry is mature. Well, what about our century-old oil industry? Don't forget, oil was discovered in Pennsylvania in 1859. Now, we haven't had the incentives for that long, but according to the Government Accountability Office, the tax breaks allowing for the expensing of intangible drilling costs began in 1960, more than 95 years ago, and continues today. The percentage depletion allowance was enacted in 1926, 85 years ago, and it still exists today. After 95 years, is the domestic oil industry not mature? I know my colleagues will be interested in how much these two subsidies have cost the American people. A report issued by the General Accounting Office in the year 2000 looked at the subsidies for the oil production. It reviewed 32-year period between 1968 and the year 2000. During that time frame, the intangible drilling subsidy cost the American people as much as $52 billion. The percentage depletion subsidy cost the American people $82 billion. So these two provisions, enacted nearly a century ago, cost the American people as much as $114 billion from 1968 till the year 2000, and this doesn't even include the subsidies during the past 11 years. Last month, we had a vote here in the Senate to repeal a number of these oil and gas tax provisions. Opponents of repealing oil and gas subsidies argued then, and I presume would argue today, that doing so would reduce domestic energy production and drive up our dependence on foreign oil. Opponents at that time also argued that it would cost U.S. jobs and increase prices at the pump for consumers. Now, I happen to agree with those arguments, but if those arguments are good for oil, they're good for not just ethanol, but they're good for all sorts of green energy as well. Prices at the pump are nearly $4 a gallon. All of our constituents are crying out for action to lower these prices. So it makes sense that Congress would consider steps to address the rising energy costs and work to drive down the cost to consumers at the pump. That's not what the Coburn Amendment would do. It would not drive down the cost at the pump at all. It would very likely lead to higher prices for consumers. It won't lead to the production of any more energy. It won't create any more jobs. It very well could lead to less domestic energy production and less employment in the U.S. energy sector. In other words, more unemployment and more dependence upon foreign sources of energy. At a time of $4 gas and 9 1/10% unemployment, Why would we in this body consider an amendment that will increase the cost of energy production, reduce domestic energy supply, and lead to job losses? Ethanol is reducing prices at the pump. A recent study by the Center for Agriculture and Rural Development found that ethanol is reducing the price at the pump by an average of 89 cents a gallon. The fact is, this amendment is not about reducing prices at the pump. The amendment before us is not about reducing our dependence upon foreign oil. That amendment is about raising taxes. And one thing is for certain. If you raise taxes on any activity, you get less of it. That's common economic principle. A taxpayer watchdog group considers a repeal of this tax incentive to be what it is, a tax hike. Americans for Tax Reform said, quote, "Repealing the ethanol credit is a corporate income tax increase," end of quote. I agree with them. Now is not the time to impose a gas tax hike on the American people. Now is not the time to send pink slips to ethanol-related jobs. I know we all agree that we cannot and should not allow job-killing tax hikes during the time of economic uncertainty. What this Congress should be doing is increasing the domestic production of energy as a way to increase jobs, increase domestic investment, and lower prices at the pump. This amendment does none of those things, and actually, you know what, does exactly the opposite. A repeal of the ethanol tax incentive is a tax increase that will surely be passed on to the American consumers. Repealing incentives for ethanol would have the same exact result as the repeal of the oil and gas subsidies. We'll get less domestically produced energy. It will cost U.S. jobs. It will increase our dependence upon foreign oil. It will increase prices at the pump for the American consumer. So, why do my colleagues want to increase our foreign energy independence when we can produce it right here at home? So I'd like to ask my colleagues who voted against repealing the oil and gas subsidies but support repealing incentives on renewable fuels, why the inconsistency? Interestingly, the same oil and gas association that is lobbying for repeal of the ethanol incentive led the charge against raising taxes on the oil and gas industry. The president of the National Petrochemical and Refiners Association stated, quote, "Targeting a specific industry or even a segment of that industry is what we would consider punitive and unfair tax policy, and it is not going to get us increased energy security, increased employment, and certainly not going to lower the price of gasoline," end of quote from the president of the National Petrochemical and Refineries Association. The fact is, it's intellectually inconsistent to say that increasing taxes on ethanol is justified, but that it is irresponsible to do so on oil and gas production. If tax incentives lead to more domestic energy production and to good-paying jobs, why are only incentives for oil and gas important? It is even more ridiculous to claim that the 30-year-old ethanol industry is mature, but the oil and gas industry, now over 100 years old, is not. Regardless, I don't think that we should be raising taxes on any type of energy production or on any individual, particularly when we have a very weak economy. And this amendment is a tax increase. The senator from Oklahoma also insists that because the renewable fuel is required to be used, it doesn't need an incentive. But with oil prices at $100 a barrel, oil companies are doing everything they can to extract more oil from the ground. There isn't a mandate to use oil, but oil already has a 100-year-old monopoly on our transportation infrastructure. And that 100-year-old monopoly, they want to maintain as much of it as they can now. Right now, because about 10% of the energy used in cars is ethanol, they may only have a 90% of a monopoly, but they sure got a lot to say about what goes into your gas tank without competition. When there is little competition to oil and it's enormously profitable, wouldn't that industry argue that the necessary incentives exist to produce it without additional taxpayer support? Oil essentially has a mandate today, and the economics of oil production are clearly in favor of producers. It's still unclear to me why we're having this debate on this bill. This is not an energy bill. It is not a tax bill. Its prospects here in the Senate are uncertain. Maybe most importantly, if this amendment were attached to a bill, the entire bill would be blue-slipped by the House, because revenue bills under our Constitution must originate in the House of Representatives, and this is not a House revenue bill we're working on. If we send it to the other body with this amendment, they will send it right back here to us. It will be dead on arrival in the other body. So why are we having this debate on this bill? We should be debating this amendment in the context of a comprehensive energy plan. This debate should include a review of the subsidies for all energy production, not just for one of many renewable resources. I could ask, why are we talking about this subsidy on on ethanol, when we're not talking about the subsidies on oil? Why should we be talking about this subsidy on one alternative energy, which is ethanol, but not talking about the subsidies for wind and solar and biomass and geothermal and I suppose a dozen other alternative energies that we have? It boils down to the fact that we shouldn't be singling out ethanol. Nearly every type of energy gets some market-distorting subsidy from the federal government, and I've indicated that to you at least for 95 years on one oil subsidy. An honest energy debate should include ethanol, oil, natural gas, nuclear, hydropower, wind, solar, biomass, and probably a lot of others that don't come to my mind at this particular time. In December 2010, Congress enacted a one-year extension of the volumetric ethanol excise tax credit that for short goes by the acronym VTEC, but this is also known as a blender's credit. This one-year extension has allowed Congress and the domestic biofuels industry to determine the best path forward for federal support of biofuels. As a result of these discussions, Senator Conrad and I introduced bipartisan legislation on May 4 that is a serious, responsible first step to reducing and redirecting federal tax incentives for ethanol. Our bill will reduce VTEC to a fixed rate of 20 cents in 2012, 15 cents in 2013. It will then convert to a variable tax incentive for the remaining 3 years based upon the price of crude oil. When crude oil is more than $90 a barrel, there will be no blender's credit. When crude oil is $50 a barrel or less, the blender's credit would be 30 cents. The rate will vary when the price of crude is between $50 and $90 a barrel. When oil prices are high, a natural incentive should exist in the market to drive ethanol use. It also would extend through the bill would extend through the year 2016 the alternative fuel refueling property credit, the cellulosic producer's tax credit, and the special depreciation allowance for cellulosic biofuel plant property. Today, Senator Thune and Senator Klobuchar are introducing another bipartisan bill to immediately reduce and reform the ethanol tax incentive. It includes many of the same features as the bill I introduced last month, but it enacts the reform this year. Senator Thune's approach also leads to significant deficit reduction. The legislation we've introduced is a responsible approach that will reduce the existing blender's credit and put those valuable resources into investing in alternative fuel infrastructure, including alternative fuel pumps. It would responsibly and predictably reduce the existing tax incentive and help get alternative fuel infrastructure in place so consumers can decide at the pump which fuel they'd prefer. I know that when the American consumers have the choice, they will choose domestic, clean, affordable, renewable fuel. They'll choose fuel from America's farmers and ranchers rather than from oil sheiks and foreign dictators. Both of the ethanol reform bills I mentioned are supported by the ethanol advocacy groups. In an almost unprecedented move, the ethanol industry is advocating for a reduction in their federal incentives. No other energy industry, whether it's fossil fuels or renewable, has come to the table to reduce their subsidies. No other energy advocate has come to me with a plan to reduce their federal support. In conclusion, I'd like to address 2 points that ethanol opponents continue to make despite facts to the contrary. First, ethanol and ethanol incentives are not a major factor in rising food and corn prices. U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack recently stated, quote, "During the great run-up in food and commodity prices in 2007 and 2008, biofuel production played only a minor role, accounting for about 10% of the total increase in global prices," end of quote. But going back to that time or even more recently, listen to the big food manufacturers that are part of this coalition attacking ethanol. You would think that the entire blame for the increase in the price of food is because of ethanol, even though ethanol consumes only 3% of the coarse grain produced in the entire world. A recent report by the Center for Agriculture and Rural Development concluded that only 8% of the increase in corn prices from 2006 to 2009 was due to ethanol. Further, they concluded that because of this small impact, it, quote, necessarily implies that the contribution of ethanol subsidies to food inflation is largely imperceptible in the United States, end of quote. Second, ethanol reduces greenhouse gas emissions significantly compared to gasoline. The fact is, under the renewable fuel standard created in 2007, corn ethanol was required to reduce greenhouse gas emissions compared to gasoline by at least 20%. Now, the fact is corn ethanol exceeded that threshold. If you remove EPA's use of the murky science surrounding emissions from indirect land use changes, ethanol reduces greenhouse gas emissions by 48% compared to gasoline. A recent peer-reviewed study published in the Yale Journal of Industrial Ecology found that ethanol reduces greenhouse gas emissions by up to 59% compared to gasoline. Ethanol currently accounts for 10% of our gasoline fuel pool. A study found that the ethanol industry contributed $8.4 billion to the federal treasury in 2009. That happens to be $3.4 billion more than the ethanol incentive. Today, the industry supports 400,000 U.S. jobs. That's why I support homegrown, renewable, reliable fuels industry. I'd rather our nation be dependent on renewable fuel producers across this country rather than relying on Middle Eastern oil sheiks or Hugo Chavez in Brazil. And none of those people like us, and some of them are training terrorists with our own money to kill us. I'd prefer that we instead support our renewable fuel producers based right here in the continental United States. I'd prefer that we decrease our dependence on Hugo Chavez and not increase it. And certainly don't support raising the tax on gasoline during a weak economy. I encourage my colleagues to vote no on the motion to invoke cloture on the Coburn Amendment, and I yield the floor.
The Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the period for morning business be extended until 7 p.m., with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to speak in morning business for 25 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, to the millions of Americans who are struggling to find jobs or make ends meet, this is simply stating the obvious. But I rise today, a decade after we were told that the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy would stimulate the economy and create jobs, to say that they have done neither. A decade of the Bush tax cuts have proven what we knew from the beginning, that they disproportionately benefited the wealthy, shifted wealth, did nothing for the middle class, and nothing trickled down. The tax cuts exploded the debt and continue to be an economic burden that has been twisted into a Republican mantra, an ironic rallying cry for what clearly is a failed economic policy. And yet adherence to the tax cuts for the wealthy is a Republican political litmus test, no matter how clear the evidence is that they have failed to deliver on the promise. And now we again hear our colleagues on the other side of the aisle pursuing their my way or the highway approach to legislating. This time they're protecting these failed tax policies in the current debt limit negotiations. And they're putting tax cuts for millionaires ahead of poor seniors in nursing homes. These are the very same tax cuts for millionaires that helped get us into this fiscal mess, and they should most certainly be on the table to help us get out. You know, it's like my Republican colleagues have thrown a lavish dinner party for the past decade, and now they want us to pick up the check. And what we're saying, Mr. President, is let's go Dutch and share the tab. 10 years later, it's abundantly clear that tax cuts for the wealthy are nothing more than an ideological and political pivot point, not a sustainable economic policy. Our Republican colleagues use this failed notion as a one-size-fits-all for political sleight of hand for all economic circumstances. Tax cuts in bad times, tax cuts in good times, tax cuts in all types of economic circumstances. Mr. President, that's not policy, it's a convenient bumper sticker slogan. Our Republican friends on the other side come to the floor prepared to end Medicare as we know it. They come to the floor prepared to slash government to the bone, but are unwilling to even entertain revisiting this failed economic policy, unwilling to consider adding a single penny to the revenue side of the equation by limiting this blind giveaway to those who need it the least. They will not entertain asking the wealthiest to be part of the solution for America, and I believe if asked, they would be. They will not put tax cuts on the table, but have made ending Medicare as we know it the centerpiece. They told us from the beginning that wealth will trickle down, tax cuts will lift all boats, those who get the benefit of the cuts will do what's right for America and its people and create American jobs for American families. Well, the facts do not suggest such an altruistic outcome. Tax cuts for the wealthy have turned out to be the greatest failed jobs program in American history. All of the grand promises aside, all of the rhetoric about job growth and economic stimulus, all of that lofty rhetoric aside, just 3 years after the Bush tax cuts in June of 2004, we lost almost 1 million jobs, more than 300,000 jobs a year for each year of 3 years. The fact is, this economic policy didn't stimulate job growth at home, but it did create job transfers abroad. Factories closed, jobs went overseas, services were outsourced, the rich got richer, and tax cut produced no jobs in America for 3 years. None. In April of 2003, almost 2 years after the tax cuts were passed, President Bush stood before the American people and he said, quote, "These tax reductions will bring real and immediate benefits to middle-income Americans. By speeding up the income tax cuts, we will speed up economic recovery and the pace of job creation." And he called the tax cuts a victory for fairness and a vote for economic growth. Well, the fact is that the Bush tax cuts coincided with the most anemic economic expansion of the post-war period. It exploded the deficit and the debt and concentrated wealth at the top, unlike any concentration of wealth since the Gilded Age of the late 19th century. This, in addition to 2 wars unpaid for in Iraq and Afghanistan, a new entitlement program passed by Republicans unpaid for, and a marketplace that instead of being a free market was a free-for-all market, created the excesses that brought us to the culmination of 2008's incredible economic challenge to this country on the verge of a potential new depression, and drove so much of the debt that the nation faces today. So for all the rhetoric from the right, the Bush tax cuts have been the greatest failed jobs program and the most ineffective economic stimulus effort in our history, succeeding only in creating a new class of super rich in America. And let's talk about this shift in wealth in the last decade. As much as my Republican colleagues try to twist themselves into knots and jumps through elaborate hoops to disprove the obvious, the facts are clear. 10 years later, and the Bush tax cuts have disproportionately widened the income gap to a point today where the wealthiest 1% of households in this country own almost 40% of all private wealth in this country. More wealth than the bottom 90% of all Americans combined. Think about it, Mr. President. The wealthiest 1% of households in this country own 40% of all private wealth, more than almost all of the rest of us combined. That is an extraordinary shift in wealth in the 10 years since the tax cuts were enacted that has cost this nation $2.5 trillion in revenue, with about 40% of the benefits going to households with incomes over $380,000. And yet our friends on the other side say no to a single mother who sits up in the middle of the night with a sick child wondering if she can afford to take that child to the doctor, praying so that she can afford the medicine that child needs and still put food on the table, hoping she'll be able to keep her job and her health care plan. All that wealth at the top, and Republicans have said no to a young student who needs a Pell Grant so he or she can get the education they need to succeed. All that wealth at the top, and Republicans have said no to a mom-and-pop grocery store owner who can't get the capital they need to make repairs or expand. Our friends on the other side have looked into the eyes of that mother, that student, that store owner, and said no, no to health care, no to education, no to small business capital. They've even said no to extending unemployment benefits, but asking the wealthy to pay their fair share, that's off the table. The one thing they have said yes is to end Medicare as we know it, and leaving seniors to fend for themselves. Now, I have been visiting senior centers in my home state of New Jersey. I just came from one earlier today to hear thoughts on the current budget discussions on Medicare. A typical 65-year-old at these meetings under the Republican budget proposal would pay an additional $7,000 by the year 2022. Right now, over 140,000 seniors in New Jersey are paying more for their medications because they fall into that donut hole. Under the Republican plan, those New Jersey seniors will pay an additional $80 million for prescription drugs next year. And by 2020, seniors currently in the drug hole will pay an additional $1.6 billion. Nationwide, nearly 4 million seniors will pay $2.2 billion more for prescription drugs in 2012 alone under the Republican plan. A plan that would end Medicare also force at least 1 million seniors to pay over $110 million more for annual wellness visits in 2012. And then, turning to Medicaid, looking to turn that into a block grant program, the Republican plan could cost America more than 2 million private sector jobs over the next 5 years and threaten our economic recovery. But that's not all. Nationwide, the Republican plan could cut more than $503 billion in Medicaid funding for seniors, the disabled, including life-saving nursing home care, leaving us with the uncomfortable and unanswerable question I pose to my Republican friends. What will those fellow Americans do? Where will they go? What happens to them under the Republican budget plan? These are people, not budget numbers. What happens to them? Now, something is wrong with that picture of America. It is not the America I know, Mr. President. Something is fundamentally wrong when we let seniors fend for themselves and enact policies that lead to inequalities in income and wealth that are the most skewed since the Gilded Age and the Great Depression. How many years are we going to buy into the failed notion of trickle-down voodoo economics that reward the winners and leave the middle class behind? We all know we need to cut wasteful spending. We know we need to balance the budget, and we've done it before. It wasn't that long ago that, in fact, during another Democratic administration, we had budget surpluses as far out as the eye could see. And how quickly we forget. The day Bill Clinton left office, he handed the incoming president a $236 billion surplus with a projected surplus of $5.6 trillion over the next 10 years. When President Bush left office, he had turned a $236 billion surplus into a $1.3 trillion budget deficit with projected shortfalls of over $8 trillion over the next decade, and handed the new president, President Obama, an economy headed off the cliff. Now our Republican colleagues want to go back to the same failed policies. They want to give more tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires, continue subsidies to big oil while they end Medicare as we know it, gut Pell Grants, and all that they mean to our economic future. They insist on tax cuts that will cost $700 billion on the revenue side over the next 10 years and trillions more by slashing tax rates for the wealthy and the powerful. Those making more than $1 million a year will see a windfall of $125,000 each from the tax cuts and tens of thousands of dollars more for proposed tax rate cuts, while people in my home state lose $34 billion in health benefits and 400,000 New Jerseyans end up without health coverage at all. They want to continue to shift the balance to millionaires and billionaires while making draconian cuts to health care benefits for seniors, cuts that do not reflect our values as a people and as a nation. Even a majority of Tea Partiers think it's a bad idea, according to recent polls. Now, I'm reminded that our distinguished Republican colleagues are symbolized in their party by an elephant, a large animal that never forgets. But conveniently, our Republican colleagues have forgotten what Vice President Cheney told America on national television as he was waging two wars, both unpaid for. He said, quote, "Deficits don't matter." Vice President Cheney, deficits don't matter. Well, Republicans have apparently forgotten President Bush's own words on April 16, 2001, about the benefits of favoring the wealthiest Americans. Tax relief will create new jobs, tax relief will generate new wealth, and tax relief will open new opportunities. He was right about one thing. It created new wealth and new opportunities, all of them at the top. But show me the jobs, Mr. President. Show me the new opportunities for middle-class families. Show me what it did to keep our economy on track and protect hardworking families from losing their homes in mortgage schemes and hedge fund gambles that stole the wealth of middle-class families, taking us to the brink of economic ruin. Let's look at the simple facts about the Bush tax cuts 10 years later. The top 1/10 of 1% of American wage owners, those earning more than $3 million a year, received an average tax cut of $520,000 each, far more than most American families dream of making, a tax cut more than 450 times larger than the meager tax cut of an average middle-class wage earner. Those earning over $3 million benefited from lower tax rates on capital gains, lower tax rates on dividends, lower marginal rates for the top 2 tax brackets. From 2002 to 2007, the top 1% of American wage earners enjoyed 65% of the total income gains during that 5-year period. And in those 5 years, nothing trickled down. In fact, real hourly earnings fell by almost 2% for men in the bottom 10% of wage earners. It fell a 0.5% for men in the middle of the 50th percentile, but it increased almost 3% for men in the top 10%. Nothing trickled down. If the Bush tax cuts were designed as a stimulus, they failed again. Moody's has said that making the cuts permanent would generate only 35 cents in economic activity for every dollar they cost. Under the American Recovery Act, the payback would be $1.17 for every dollar of the making work pay credit and $1.38 for the child tax credit. Clearly, the stimulus effect of the Bush cuts was not a stimulus at all. And as far as the debt is concerned, from 2001 and 2010, the cuts added $2.6 trillion to the debt, 50% of the total accrued during that 10-year period. The fact is the Bush cuts average out to lower revenue levels as a share of the economy than any previous decade since the 1950s, even as we have America's sons and daughters in 2 wars raging abroad unpaid for. And the extension of the cuts in the December tax bill is projected to decrease revenues by $423 billion from 2012 to 2021, making the total cost more than $5 trillion over the next decade. And yet, Republicans will not put any of that $5 trillion on the table, not even the tax cuts for millionaires, but they'll happily end Medicare as we know it and kick poor seniors out of their nursing homes. This is something we cannot let happen. So, Mr. President, as I said before on the floor of the Senate, in their ideological haze, they seem to have lost sight of the real people whose lives will be affected by the choices we make. The Republican vision of America is about the bottom line. It seems to me that they fail to realize that budgets are not just about numbers. Budgets are about people, their hopes, their dreams, their expectations for a better life for themselves and their children. They're about the promise of this country and the dream we have come to expect, the vision we have of safe, clean, vibrant communities in which to raise our families. Budgets are a reflection of our values, not a faceless calculation of pluses and minuses just to reach an arbitrary number, regardless of the impact on middle-class families looking to get back to work and pay the bills. All of us have a budget, Mr. President. Maybe it's not a formal budget, but we all have one. On the revenue side, we have what we earn from gainful employment, investment, interest on savings. On the flip side, we have our expenses, our mortgage payment, groceries, utilities. We have our contribution, perhaps to our church or synagogue, donations to a favorite charity, a worthy cause. These are expressions of our personal values, just as the nation's budget is an expression of our collective values. We may not always think of the budget in those terms, but we should. It's about our values. The tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts enacted a decade ago are antithetical to the values that we as a people and nation have. Middle-class families and seniors should not be left to pay the tab for a decade of lavish tax cuts that did nothing but make millionaires richer. Those tax breaks helped us to get into this mess, and they certainly should be on the table to help us get out of it. If we do that, Mr. President, then we have a wherewithal to do what we did once again under President Clinton. balance the budget for the first time in a generation, create record surpluses, low unemployment, low interest rates, low inflation, and the greatest peacetime economy in over a generation. Those are the choices that are before the Senate and the country, and I hope we can get our colleagues to understand the right choice on behalf of the nation's progress and prosperity. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I rise today to express my strong opposition to the amendment offered by my colleague from Oklahoma, which we will be voting on tomorrow. Before I talk about the substance of the amendment, I want to comment on the procedure through which it was offered. There was no warning to Senate leadership or to any of our colleagues, and while technically it wasn't in violation of Senate rules, it undermines the basic comity that makes this body work. It's a disservice to do business this way, to our colleagues, to bipartisanship, and to the American people who sent us to Washington to get things done by working together. So I'm disappointed in the way this was handled. Now let me talk about the amendment itself. Today, families in Minnesota and around the country are paying painfully high prices at the pump as oil still hovers around $100 a barrel. What this amendment does is cut the legs out from under the most viable alternative to foreign oil that we have. Despite decade after decade of rhetoric about weaning our country off of foreign oil, we're still dependent on it. And while about a third of our oil imports come from Canada and Mexico, close to half come from the Persian Gulf, Africa, or Venezuela. Last year at this time, we were dealing with the Gulf oil spill, the worst environmental catastrophe that we've ever had. That was maybe the most jarring reminder of what's been clear for decades, that we've got to kick our addiction to oil. And while that's not something we can do overnight, we need to do everything in our power to transition to alternatives. Well, there's no more viable alternative than biofuels. Today, the industry that has been most successful in displacing oil is under attack. We're talking about an industry using homegrown American resources, an industry that has created thousands of jobs and catalyzed economic development across rural America. And the first generation of biofuels has paved the way for the next generation of advanced biofuels. The first commercial-scale cellulosic ethanol plant is being built this year in Emmitsburg, Iowa, where we'll be making ethanol from corn cobs. According to a recent study done by the researchers at Iowa State University and the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the growth in ethanol production reduced wholesale gas prices by an average of 89 cents per gallon in 2010. And in the Midwest, that number was higher, $1.37 per gallon. Let me repeat that. At a time when so many American families are struggling to pay their bills and make ends meet, they would have paid an average of 89 cents more per gallon of gas last year had we not had ethanol. But instead of giving this industry the tools that it needs to grow and reduce our oil dependence even more, this amendment hangs the ethanol industry out to dry. It makes no sense. Now, I share my colleague from Oklahoma's concern about the deficit and our national debt. To cut our deficit, everyone in America will have to make some sacrifices, and that includes the ethanol industry. The easy part here is that the ethanol industry agrees. Ethanol producers stand ready to phase out the ethanol blenders' credit. But we need to be consistent. If the ethanol industry is being asked to make some sacrifices, other fuel industries need to be willing to do the same. Yet, just a month ago, many of my colleagues, including
my colleague from Oklahoma voted against repealing billions of dollars in subsidies that we pay every year to the biggest 5 oil companies. We're talking about companies that have made almost $1 trillion in profit over the last decade. My colleagues chose to leave those tax breaks in place, amounting to $21 billion in taxpayer dollars to oil companies over the next 10 years. And expert after expert has basically concluded that these subsidies are not lowering the cost of gas and would not cause it to increase if they were eliminated. But you don't need experts to tell you that. Subsidies for oil and gas are on the books right now, and some have been on the books since as far back as 1916, but they've done nothing to stem the skyrocketing gas prices that are squeezing the budgets of American families. Yet, when we're talking about ethanol, a homegrown alternative to foreign oil that lowers prices at the pump, my colleagues seem to think it is absolutely imperative to repeal this tax credit now. So when it's repealing subsidies for oil and gas companies operating in oil-producing states like Oklahoma, that's somehow a tax hike. But cutting a tax credit that supports an American renewable fuel, well, that's fiscal responsibility. The hypocrisy here is just stunning. Regardless, America's ethanol producers are ready and willing to phase out this credit, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. The Coburn Amendment, which abruptly ends the credit at the end of this month, is the wrong way. The right way is to responsibly phase out the tax credit in a manner that allows the industry to build out the infrastructure it needs to bring advanced biofuels into the U.S. market. Today, my colleagues and I are introducing legislation that does it the right way, and I urge every member of this body to support it. Right now, our biofuels industry is hitting a wall because of the national 10% ethanol blend limit we've had on the books. It also is hamstrung by the inability of most cars and gas pumps to use blends higher than 10% ethanol. That means that cellulosic ethanol and other advanced biofuels have no market access or market to grow into. This isn't an industry problem, it's a public policy program. The EPA's E15 waiver was a step in the right direction to address this very problem. But without pumps that can blend higher ethanol blends, American consumers have no way to access additional ethanol that would and should be on the market. What our legislation does is reform our ethanol tax policy by ending the ethanol tax credit in its current form at the end of the month. It then invests part of the savings into biofuels infrastructure, part toward extending the cellulosic ethanol credit, and puts $1 billion toward reducing our deficit. Reducing America's dependence on oil is going to require a national strategy, and biofuels are just one part of that strategy. We also need to do things like deploy more electric vehicles and make our entire economy more energy efficient. But we have to recognize that if we don't fix our national policies to allow the biofuels industry to grow, we're actively choosing foreign oil and dirty fossil fuels over domestic, homegrown, renewable fuels. Because let me tell you something. You're never going to see a massive ethanol spill in the Gulf of Mexico that kills 11 workers, destroys thousands and thousands of livelihoods, and does irreparable harm to vital ecosystems. You're never going to see foreign countries collude to restrict the supply of ethanol and drive up gas prices for American families. And as we transition to advanced biofuels and expand this industry, you're not going to see these jobs go overseas. This is an American industry. It's American jobs, and it's American energy independence. I urge my colleagues to make the responsible choice, one that will keep this industry moving forward. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.